welcome all. I'm going to just briefly introduce to people online of Jolanda, just a quick introduction of you, and then I'll hand over to you. Switch that microphone. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. On behalf of Emerge Africa, I would like to welcome to this session we are running today with Jolanda Morkel from the Peninsula University of Technology, who is going to tell us a bit about her experiences with a program based on blended learning. And actually, in the spirit of being blended, we are having this as a combined session with members gathering here at the University of Cape Town at the Center for Innovation in Teaching and Learning, and then with our other colleagues joining online from various places. I see colleagues from Kenya, Australia, and other places joining us, so welcome all. Please notice that this session will be recorded, and we'll be sharing the recording after this session.
Right, so I'm on. Can you hear me? Must I move it closer? Is it right?
It's fine.
Is it all right?
Let's just check with participants online if you are able to hear.
Hi everyone, thanks so much. It's actually quite weird to be sitting in a venue without a headset and just be talking into the ether. But it's nice to see everybody who's online and of course in the venue, and to see your text and text chat actually on the board, on the wall, just right next to me. So I'm going to just start by saying thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm very privileged to be part of this first blended event, and I hope to see many more, and I hope to be attending a number of them from wherever, either in the venue or online. I've got my typed out notes in paper, so I'm also doing it quite blended. So if you hear paper rustling, it's because of that. I've been asked to share our pilot study in the domain of architecture. Now, I'm going to start out and try and extract some general principles so that it can be applicable to people in whichever field you're working in, education or medicine or languages or whatever, not necessarily in the design domain. Just as we start, if you think back on your learning journey as you sit here, and I think back to where you learned your first word and coming to right up to the point of view where you are, if you had to plot that learning journey with line, you can see I'm in the graphic domain. I like to draw things. How would you draw that? How would you make a picture of that actual learning journey? Can I advance the slides from the mouse? Yeah. Just there. Go. Thank you. I have to click on the wall. Right. That's right. Yes. Good. So, what will it be like? Will it be winding like that, considering that we're working from left to right in time? Will it be a straight line, just heading to graduation, easy and straight? Will it be, is it interrupted? Does it perhaps look like this? Now, if we look at the traditional learning model, it doesn't look like perhaps any of those three pictures. We have a system of education that's modeled on the interest of industrialism and in the image of it. Schools are still pretty much organized on factory lines, ringing bells, separate facilities, specialized into separate subjects. We still educate children by batches. That's what Ken Robinson says. I think that's also applicable to education, higher education and universities. And what does this model that we are currently working with, what does it look like and how does learning happen? I see lectures, a timetable and a campus. That is the typical university setup. But what does the lecture contribute? Lectures, while effective at covering material, are terrible for information transfer from the student's point of view. There are serious problems with retention and recall of information given in a lecture, even if the lecture is rhetorically solid. And this is to say nothing about the disconnect between the length of the average lecture and the average human being's attention span. I've lost track of how little that is. It must be about 30 seconds by now. I don't know how, at the rate that people multitask, how long can you actually be engaged in one particular event or situation. The etymology of the word suggests that the original lectures were readings, like I'm doing most of it now because I've got limited time and I don't want to forget anything. But the teacher or the priest at the time read handwritten speeches. That was before the printing press was invented. So the student's job was to take verbatim notes as a way of both learning the material and capturing the ideas in print. To this day, many former lectures involve the reading of papers, and some also use PowerPoint. Right, so that is what if we had to walk on campus and to peek into the venues, what we would typically find. The assumption has generally been campus is best, but is it? And if so, for what? Is it really good? What is the best use of time in class and out of class, given our goals and given the availability of modern educational resources beyond the words of the lecturer? So the reality is that that we are stuck to the timetable and that we have a campus that is also tying us down with roll call and assuming that if the student is in the lecture that learning will automatically happen. Tony Bates wrote this very amusing story on his blog, and he was saying that students in many of our large urban universities have become commuters, coming in just for their lectures, maybe using the learning commons between lectures, getting a bite to eat and then heading home. As we have massified our universities, the broader cultural aspects have been lost. You know, what are we coming to campus for? So, the reality check is that learners are diverse. One size does not fit all, especially in the African context where there are big inequalities. Broadening of access, alternative routes to qualification are needed, choice and flexibility. I want to be learning with wearing my pajamas. That's actually what one of my colleagues said. It's so amazing to teach wearing your pajamas or sitting in bed with red wine and learning at the same time. I know some people do that. The world of work is changing. The traditional idea of the single career is changing. My poor kids get this project every year. What do you want to become? You know, like this life decision that they've got to make. How do they even know where to start? I thought there were three things I never wanted to do. Medicine, I'm sticking to that. Computers and education were the two things that I actually said never in my life I will do. So I'm never saying never again. So, but what about all the possible variants in between the traditional and the vocational models that's known to us, and how does that allow for lifelong learning? We live in a connected world where learning happens anywhere and any time. Just yesterday, I read on Grania Canal's blog, and she's been a presenter at Emerge as well. She was asking for help online. She often does that. She says, I'm going to do a presentation, and please, on Facebook or Twitter, you know, give me some ideas. She's saying today, social media enables you to interact with people around the globe, to pose and answer questions, to seek advice. People can add contributions via Google Docs. So she's asking them to do that. She says it will then be added to a Wiki Educator page. I'm looking forward to seeing the contributions come in and developing the course. Social media rocks. So you can find a blog on, I think it's e4innovation.com. Okay, so we have social media, we have Uber, we have a Google Play Store. How does that impact the way that we think about education? Right, so we also have dwindling resources. People complain about infrastructure, blackouts, load shedding, a diverse and increasingly diverse student body, and of late also disruptions on campus. So what do we do about that? We need to do some stirring. Get into the kitchen and do some serious stirring. In cases where the traditional inherited model is no longer serving the needs for learning, and I'm not saying it's the case everywhere, there's a place for the lecture, there's a place for campus, there's a place for all of that. But in cases where it's not serving learning, qualification, accreditation in the job market, perhaps it should be reconsidered, pulled apart, perhaps it should just be deconstructed in a way. And the kinds of things, possible strategies that we can consider that I can think of are the strategic partnerships. How can we work with industry? How can we collaborate with our professions, with business, etc.? How can recognition of prior learning be optimized to open access rather than restricting it? At the moment, it's quite it's an obstacle. You know, it's not really helping people. I believe, the way it's been applied to open access. What is the role of assessment? What's it actually for? Can it be valuable for learning and not only for qualification? How can open educational resources be employed and shared in a meaningful way? How can multiple and flexible learning pathways be provided? I'm thinking of micro-credentialing, different ways of moving beyond the formal confines of the university. How can the transition between studies and work be facilitated? What is the incentive and purpose of the learning? Do our learners want to satisfy their parents? Do they want to prove something to their peers? Do they want to make a lot of money? What are they there for, in the classroom for? How can effective learning environments be conceptualized for quality learning experiences? What does it feel like for the students sitting there and listening and learning? What is the role of content in learning? Big, important, interesting thing. What are the available tools and how can they be optimized? And how is success measured? Right, so let's stir and see how can we do things differently. And the discussion moving away from e-learning to the blend. If we consider everything that we have at our disposal, how do we design the best possible learning experience for our learners? McGee and Rice propose that blended course designs involve instructor and learners working together in mixed delivery modes, typically face-to-face and technology-mediated, to accomplish learning outcomes that are pedagogically supported through assignments, activities, and assessments as appropriate for a given mode, and which bridge course environments in a manner meaningful to the learner. So it means that what's appropriate for one context may not be appropriate for another. That's where learning design comes in, which is not the topic of my talk, but that I can really get excited about for hours next time. Right, so not only does the blended learning environment enable access and transformation, and does it help to continue learning when campuses are disrupted, just from my experience, but it also enables intellectual activity that was not practically possible without technology. How can blended learning be better than we had before? If we're going to change things just to change it, we're wasting our time. How can we make things better? So to get to our, oops, now I got out of, sorry, there. The case study that I want to present to you today, very, very briefly, is a blended program offered by CPUT in collaboration with Open Architecture. Open Architecture is a unit established by the South African Institute of Architecture. So it's a university-industry collaboration that is aimed at broadening access to the profession. Because through the traditional routes, we're not seeing that transformation, and we haven't seen it for the last 20 years at least. So in 2014, the 2-year blended part-time BTech program commenced. The admission criteria, fees, curriculum, assessment, selection and moderation processes, everything is aligned with the full-time program equivalent. So it's facilitated by open architecture for working individuals. And we have students as far afield as Namibia, Zimbabwe, Durban, Johannesburg. About 40% reside in Cape Town. And this year we took our third cohort, we accepted. Just interestingly, we accepted 13 students through the RPL route this year, which is quite, they make up almost just under half of the class. So that's going to be an interesting experiment for us to see how they are doing. So what makes it unique really is the fact that architectural education has a strong studio tradition. And for more than 100 years, this mode of learning has remained unchanged. Studio is where theoretical learning is applied through the student engaging with the design problem in a studio face-to-face, sitting around a table or putting their work on a board, and it's a thinking together kind of process. The student engages with the design problem, supported and facilitated by tutors and their peers, and they're working at this problem that's communicated through drawings, text, model, and verbally. So it's very tactile. You know, how on earth do you do that online? So you can imagine the skepticism when we started this program, the architects thinking, it is not going to work, it's just not possible. So moving this learning methodology out of the physical studio and into an online space was inconceivable. However, as part of a blended approach, where studio happens in different places, so we have blocks on campus 3 times a year, in the workplace, through mentorship, and in different online spaces, this so-called signature pedagogy remains. So for us, the starting point was, how do we allow the technology to serve the educational objectives and not the other way around? What our research is showing is that the different online spaces manage to enrich the studio process rather than compromising it at the moment, and we've got some very good results to brag about. Our students actually competing in national competitions, doing really, really well. We're using the same moderators as on the full-time program and benchmarking through that. Really, really achieved good results. Of course, the students are highly motivated. They're paying for their own studies. They're also working. They're more mature. So all those things also contribute to the picture. So I just want to briefly explain to you the 3 components, and then I have a video where the students actually talk about the experience, which is ultimately, I think, what counts. What was interesting was that we expected that the online part was really going to be the difficult part. And that proved to be the most easy part of the 3. The most challenging component was, can you guess which one? Workplace. Because students were required, or actually through an MOA, the employers committed to allow the students 2.5 days a week in office time working. Now you can imagine an architect's office where deadlines are cruel and time is money. So when we, at the end of last year, did a very small survey, we discovered that only 5% of the students indicated that they were granted 3 to 5 hours per week to do so. Okay, so there's nowhere near that. And that's something that we're working on at the moment. So we can encourage employers through CPD and other, how can we help them? So we're working on that relationship. Although they were very positive, the employers actually felt that they could see the contributions that the students are making increasingly, improving in the office, etc. But that for us was the biggest challenge. On block campus release programs, three times a year, where the students bonded really well, and we could see how the online relationships were reinforced, rather than the other way around. That was very, very interesting, and we value the face-to-face online. So I don't see the blend as ever losing the face-to-face component. The online component works, and you'll see that on the video, so I'm not going to elaborate on it, but rather than attending lectures, you can see I don't like the lecture. I've been lecturing many, many years and never, ever want to do it in the same way again. Students complete theory assignments by means of self-directed learning in their own time, according to certain milestones, but with some flexibility, through engagement with multimedia resources, including text and video, and uploading their work for feedback. That feedback is written, it's through podcasting, it's through short video, etc. In addition to the workplace studio, a virtual studio is provided through weekly online webinar sessions using audio and digital on-screen sketching. So pretty much like this webinar, except that we'll be looking not at my words, but students' drawings, and we will be drawing on the drawings. So there will be sketching audio as well. We don't use the webcam to limit bandwidth issues, and we're actually just focusing on the drawings. The students then present their work like they would present physically, and we would comment on their work. In any session, there would be around 10 to 12 students looking at the work. It gets recorded, uploaded, shared, and they can view it afterwards. So although this element was anticipated to be the most problematic, it was easily adopted by students and staff. It could be related to the fact that the students already work with computers in the office. They're not scared of digital technology. But the ages range between 23 and 43. We this year have a student that's 43 years old. Right, so getting it right, and Nicola asked me to give a few tips, and I've kind of tongue-in-cheek can share some of this. The learning design is one thing, but as an educator involved in a university setup, you have to play by the rules. And so how do you get it to happen? It's like stirring, and how far can you stir? Not to get the pot to boil over. I have to continue with the kitchen analogy. So I'm not going to elaborate on this. Fun things: agreements, payments, MOUs, subject codes, faculty office. I'm just smiling. If I knew all of this beforehand, I think that you don't think about these things because you have the end goal in mind. It's so much. It's like a video game. I feel like that little, You don't know which obstacles you have beforehand. You just jump and then go on to the next one. So if I have to give you some tips on how to go about doing this, I would single out the one very important thing, and that's number 4. Don't ask for permission. Rather say you're sorry afterwards if it doesn't work. I was saying earlier, if you want things to be perfect, nothing will ever happen. Just going to start incrementally, start with something small and build and build. I must perhaps at this point say that we've been piloting e-learning and digital technology in our studio since 2010. So we started with small things, using Facebook, using podcasts, using QR codes, using different apps, and so it's not something that happens overnight. You have to try it and see what works, and you work with your students. You actually get them on board and say, we're learning together. And that is kind of a two-way situation. So I think what we can do now, if Jacob can put the video on of what the students are actually saying, it shows our students on campus during one of their blocks. That was last year in June. And they were asked about their experience, and you will see 2 groups. Students are actually both in their first and second year of this 2-year part-time BTEC program. And then we'll take questions afterwards.
Not getting any sound.
Not getting sound.
You just go on mute.
Nicola, could you open it for you? Please?
Applications on a part-time basis, so
Because
they're
I hear
working.
you.
Play for that, please.
Decided to join this program because it's an online program that I can be able to start when I'm working,
Chose this program because it was part-time.
I even liked doing presentations, and it actually helped me a lot to open up to that.
So my mom couldn't pay for all of us, so I had to go working, and it's very difficult because architecture
interaction with the lecturers and the crits, and yeah, that was really awesome.
Like there has to be a passion because this course is challenging. I think the amount of work you do while you have to manage your life and at work and you know, have a family and everything, I think that's the most difficult part.
It's really intense, but it's really easy to work with, and the lecturers are great.
Sure, I don't know, this course has actually been quite challenging, but with the challenging came the fun bit also.
So I think it comes naturally to most people now to just engage with the online course.
The online, everyone has their set time, you have to upload your work, so you're always guaranteed a crit.
Once you've done all the work and you're stressing it and you have your portfolio meeting, getting the feedback is often like a sigh of relief.
No points, no sleep.
The most challenging aspect is the time factor, that is balancing full-time employment and also part-time studies.
Do it via my cell phone, so it's very easy. It doesn't matter what device you have, as long as you can connect onto the internet.
The worst moment was my computer crashing and I couldn't do it anymore.
Sketchy, more and more often, yeah.
Time management. Just make sure you keep on top of it the whole time, otherwise you're going to fall behind.
You learn how to cope with your time.
If you're going to do the part-time course, really use the people in your office.
Planning. I think it's all about planning.
I think you build your character very well.
Keep on looking at what's new in the industry. Keep your technology updated. Always do research.
Make sure this is what you want to do. Visit architectural places to get all that knowledge and experience the buildings.
What's interesting for me is how we can optimize technology to enrich the learning experience. So students don't have to be on campus to advance their qualifications. We can optimize, harness the workplace experience, pull in the mentors, and the learning then becomes a collaborative project between practice and the university. And I think that has been very enriching for everybody.
It's a lot of fun and it's worthwhile in the end.
I see some nice questions on the screen. I've started to.
Yeah, I've been collating them for you. Your mic's not on, so
Okay.
it's fine because they won't hear
I'm
that.
putting you on now.
Yeah. Okay. I don't have to.
Yes.
Yes, so I saw some nice questions in the text chat, but I also saw Nicola writing them down because some have scrolled off the screen on the wall. So I don't know, Nicola, whether there were some earlier questions that you want to ask.
Yes, there have been some questions around the institution's management buy-in, and also getting buy-in into and acceptance from accreditations bodies, so not just the institutions, but the accreditation bodies for online programs or components. Sort of your process, and if you have any advice to share with people doing that kind of thing.
Right, yes, I think you definitely need buy-in. I'm very lucky that my dean, Professor Johannes Cronje, is an e-learning champion and very knowledgeable, and he was supporting us all the way. We worked closely with our quality department, and we made sure that this program, in fact, is not a distance program. It qualifies still for the number of notional hours as a percentage on campus for contact time. That may change in future, we're not sure, but we want we need the blocks on campus. We feel it's important for the blend. I think that yes, we did get buy-in quite early on, but what I was more referring to is the kind of unknowns that you don't know, that the boxes, that administrative boxes that you need to tick. That's quite cumbersome. And of course, once the program shows results, also one of those tips that I added was that, tell everybody about it. Send emails, share it with management, tell the DVC, thank you so much for your support, and that has helped. Because if they don't know the successes, then it's problematic in moving forward.
Maybe we can take a question from our face-to-face audience.
Yes.
How did you deal with the mentors in the workplace?
Yes.
Who were they, and how did you structure that?
Yes. The question, if you didn't hear that clearly, was about mentors in the workplace. That's one of the requirements of studying on this program. Students have to be employed by a registered architectural professional, and they need to be assigned a mentor. The mentor must sign an MOU to commit to doing certain things. We have tried to pull in the mentors at certain times in the blocks and then reward them with CPD points. We believe that the contact with the mentors is not what it could be. But there's a small group of mentors that we regularly interact with, or the ones that respond. So we get their feedback and then we respond to that. So they are asking them ways that how can we help you as well. So they don't only give, but they also get something in return.
Do they do any? Is their relationship structured in any way in terms of the learning outcomes?
Yes, they do weekly reports. And also students need to reflect. Perhaps what I didn't say was that in addition to in addition to the synchronous webinar sessions, the students also journal. So they use graphics and text and images. And that process, reflecting on what they've learned in the workplace, also comes into that conversation. But they officially have to weekly report on what was discussed, and what subjects and what kind of comments and what the engagement was.
There was just a question related to that about what if a student missed a webinar.
Yes, we require them to attend 80% of the sessions. If they miss a webinar, they can view the recording afterwards, although that's not what the webinar is really for. It's about the engagement. What the students have told us in our feedback sessions was that they find it really hard to hide online. Whereas face-to-face in the studio, one moment you see them, the next moment they're gone. Whereas online it's quite organized, there's a time slot. If they're not there, it's glaring. And that's ironic in a way. But our attendance is really, really good. It's way above that 80%.
And then there was also a question whether this program is cheaper than the face-to-face?
Cheaper for the students or cheaper to offer?
Well, both.
Yes.
Would be interesting.
It is currently the same cost to the students, whether they do part-time over 2 years or face-to-face full-time. We feel that the two halves add up to more than a whole. You end up spending, I think, putting more energy into the half spread over two years. But we are working on that model at the moment. CPUT fees are generally very low, and with fees must fall, it's been fixed for 3 years. So that model is tricky, and we're looking at ways that perhaps we could modularize into modules that can be presented as short courses that can help to subsidize the course. At the same time, aspiring students can do those modules to build portfolios to enter into the program. So kind of blurring the boundaries between formal university and outside of university, at the same time also making it financially feasible.
And then there were also a lot of, Anna has made some really interesting comments here about assumptions about online learning. And people expecting it to be either cheaper or easier or less time consuming or quicker, easier to complete. And even I think Liza also mentioned, what was interesting is that students probably have this highlighting the same challenges that students on a face-to-face program would. Could you tell us a bit more about that in terms of maybe students and lecturers' expectations of the blended program. For example, around the same work you put in. You mentioned already a bit around that it was actually more work you put in over the 2 years than the 1 year program.
Yes. I think firstly, the whole idea, business and management will always say, wow, we can massify e-learning, will make it cheaper, we can have 1,000 students in a class. The nature of architecture and design studio, project-based, inquiry-based learning is such that through facilitation of a student's individual project, there's some things that you can't massify. There's person power that was going to those online webinar sessions, and there's a limit to it. Of course, we can massify other things. So we're trying to look at ways that we can, where do we need our person power, and put it there. And the stuff that students can do in a self-directed manner, we don't have to do year by year. We can, that can run on its own. That is the one thing. Then students expect, I think what, I saw Anna Marie's comment, and she was talking about the value of students. It seems as if they don't value the online and learning environment. I think, well, what I've heard from my students is that to them it was just another kind of studio. They felt that the online webinar tends more to lean towards the presentation, final, summative review. We have formative, kind of very much informal conversations in the studio, and then the students present their work for marks. The online webinar space, because they're required to do a lot of preparation and actually present their work in a systematic way, which is different to what they would do in studio. In studio, they would come with a pile of paper and throw it on the table, and so there is a difference. But what they're saying is it helps them to actually better prepare for the summative review. We also find, I'm digressing on this question now, but that the students really get time to articulate. In a face-to-face studio, well, what I do as an educator, I read into the drawings and I talk on behalf of the student. I can't help myself. Is this what you meant? Whereas online, there's that space for them to talk until they're finished, and then you reflect. So it is different. Nicola, I missed something. I think that, but you also still asked about expectations.
Yeah, I know I didn't ask them very clearly. I could have structured my questions a bit better. But another one that's come up here, very interesting. Liza asks, with different cohorts results, how do they compare?
Yeah.
The face-to-face versus the blended program.
Yeah. The results for the blended program was higher. We, in our final project, out of the 24 full-time students, 2 achieved distinctions. Out of the 13 part-time students, 6 achieved distinctions. So there's a big difference. But like I said, it could be related to a range of factors. The fact that they are mature, motivated, and dedicated to make it work.
And I like that you're going beyond the sort of technology is emancipatory and more democratic, and a lot of people think online learning, it's cheaper, it can be massified, and you've already told us there's some things that can't be massified.
Yes.
And so how do you encourage people who want to do this kind of thing to be thinking more about to be thinking about technology? Where should we start?
I think where to start is to pilot a small intervention and to see what happens, because every context is different, every cohort is different. We are reflecting continuously all the time. Something that's interesting, we started on a SharePoint site. Open Architecture supported us with Computer Construction Network, a unit that worked in Durban, and actually helped us to set it up. So we thought, let's use the help that we can get. So we haven't used Blackboard for 2 years. Now we're slowly moving on to Blackboard. But in the interim, because the students only get registered in March, there's 3 months that, what happens. So we've actually duplicated the whole course on Google Drive. And now we're so reluctant to move to Blackboard because it's just so easy. Students get it on their phone. So we do the journals on in a Google Doc. We share the recordings. You know what? There's nothing you can't do with Google. So we're going to keep that as a backup. And then obviously there are advantages to Blackboard in the analytics, the fact that it's the official platform. You know, you can track students better and so on. But just to get back to your question, I think is to try things, to be open with your students about the fact, you know, that you need their support, and you're in it together. And if there are problems, you just jump over that hurdle and you take it. You just don't beat yourself up about things that go wrong.
I like that you're emphasizing the relationships. Also, just to clarify for some people, Blackboard is the learning management system at CPUT, much like UCT has Bula, which is a sort of customized version of Sakai. Some of our course colleagues online from different institutions will have something else. Yolanda, you've got another question from the lady.
So my name is Diane. I'm from Liberia. I just noticed this session. I'm actually in the built environment library. How did the library, there's always the Camtasia videos that you can put up, but access to information for the students in the online environment. Can you elaborate a little bit on that, how the library supported this endeavor?
Just a question on the library for online participants who didn't hear that. How did the library support this endeavor? At the moment, and that's why I mentioned open educational resources and the fact that the content is actually not the thing. It's how we engage with it and how we use it for students to, you know, what do they do with it. Students have got access to the library online facility, so they make use of that. But we should in future, and we could, work back to the library and say, how can we now share the resources that were generated and let it work the other way? I think that's a very, very good question, so that you expand. You know, that's the whole question of intellectual property. Who does it belong to? And I've got my own views on that. Is that if we all want learning to happen, let's share the stuff. How you engage with the stuff is the actual value.
But then rather also purchase the online Lucubisia, the digital copy, to move them to an e-environment
rather than books
in the library, which
exactly. I think a good point that to see how the library could also set themselves up, because what I must just also say is that in our next phase with this project is we are looking at ways that we can align the full-time and the part-time programs, so that we can take the theory, that massive, potentially massifiable stuff, and we can collapse it so that full-time and part-time students do that online, and that we have physical studios for the full-time students and virtual students for the others. There was a question related to how students, I think Anne-Marie asked about, the virtual space, giving the student more room for expression. Through our focus groups, there was one student who said, I love being alone in a group. And what he meant was that he's sitting in his office environment, he's focusing on his work, he's in a group, but he's actually, he's not being distracted. He's focused. I asked him to talk about that. They also said they find the tutors or lecturers are more focused on them at that point than digressing or being interrupted by somebody. So, interesting.
And because I understand the students, and if I can maybe just say something here, they often go to each other and see what really interests the other person has.
Yes.
Which is quite interesting, and that observation actually makes sense to me. I am in a group, and I'm also not in a group because my neighbor can't see I'm currently interested in koolhaas.
Yes.
It's a very interesting observation, because they love to share.
They love to share, but they've got control over that sharing.
Yeah.
One very interesting thing for me that I only discovered 2 weeks ago, because I invited my graduates to come and reflect, because I said I've got no control over your marks anymore. Now you can really be honest about it. They were saying that they actually, I expected that the Facebook group, I didn't talk about that, I don't know whether it came out in the video, but we have a Facebook group just as an informal space, almost like the cafeteria. of the campus, virtual campus. I expected the students to have that kind of peer-to-peer conversation on Facebook. Then they told me they have a WhatsApp group. They are engaging with through the WhatsApp group all the time, while they are busy with the webinar. So while they're busy on the webinar, I post the link in the webinar, I then share it on Facebook, they WhatsApp about it. So it's the kind of different spaces altogether.
But I think the students always appreciate like they will find a way to create a space that's not institutionally sanctioned.
Yeah. And it's
good.
It's good.
And it's awesome that they do that.
Yeah.
Yes, and that relates to Joyce's earlier point around she wanted to know a bit more about the designing this online campus home context and perhaps this sort of blend of tools that forms part of what you're putting into this pot as part of that story.
I think for us was that ultimately we work from the end backwards. So what is needed to help students in this particular context to be able to produce a portfolio at the end of the 2 years? That is our point of departure. So we start there and then we say, how can we support and mediate that process? They are in the workplace, they are remote. So how do we design the blocks? How many do we have? For what periods of time do we do it? Not too short, but not too long. Is it just before a weekend so they can travel? Those kind of really practical things. Then what technology do they have? They're on Facebook anyway. So on Facebook, what I thought was going to be the peer-to-peer conversation, they felt that was a place where their tutor or lecturer like me would share with them some material. It's just easy to share. I see a precedent study, I share it with them, or we remind them about stuff that's on Blackboard or Google Drive or whatever. So it is to come back, and I know that's Joyce's speciality is learning design. It is about consciously engaging with the design problem, understanding the problem fully, and then negotiating a way towards some kind of a solution that is that makes sense. And but it's an organic thing. It in 5 years' time, 2 years' time, it may be different. I think it's to always reflect on your practice and to keep the end in mind.
In your studio, in the studio type learning, they work quite a lot collaboratively, don't they? So how did you manage that in the online space, particularly when you came to the drawings and the actual physical problem with the brief?
Yes.
How did that manifest?
Yes. What we do is in the block we would typically introduce a project, and then there will be a physical face-to-face group component of the project, and then that project then gets developed individually as they move away. We have not been focusing on, and in fact the full-time program doesn't focus on group work to a large extent, but they've been, of course they share resources and they collaborate in that way, but the actual portfolio is an individual portfolio. That is an interesting discussion in pedagogy total, because in the bigger picture, because in practice we don't work alone. So we're asking that same question now in how we teach and how we learn. But we're trying to use the modes, say face-to-face or online, for what they're good for. And we don't want them, like I've said, to be sitting in a lecture situation, listening to us physically, if they can do that online. When they're together, they must be engaging, talking, making stuff. Must be quite physical.
And there were interesting comments here around the sort of playing field with the webinar, and synchronous offering potentially a bit more order.
Yeah.
Because we were saying that just because it's online doesn't. Sorry, going back here. Doesn't mean you lose control. And I think for a lot of lecturers, the online space is seen as a space where they're going to lose control. Or else we assume the opposite, that it's always going to be democratic and it's going to be equal. Do you think that, because obviously with the technology, the kind of engagements, it's not to say that the online space makes things more equal for participation. But is that something that you find needs to be scaffolded with your students and negotiated? How does it become like that?
Yeah. There's something that's very common in design education, and that is that the CRIT, this formative feedback conversation, is a very traumatic experience. You'll see that in the literature. That's one of the questions that I asked my students. And they did say, yes, it's stressful right to the end of the course. I asked them whether the technology made it more stressful. They said no, it didn't make any difference. Their stress is that the fact that they've put so much in it, what the feedback will now determine how they move forward. So there's that kind of a stress factor. But interesting, they see the educator as taking on different roles. So in the Facebook group, they see me as a friend. In the webinar, they see me more as a client, what the student in a practice situation would see as a client. So the medium also changes those roles. For me as an educator, I feel, and the students didn't respond in the same way, for me, gender and demographics gets equalized online because you don't have the physical presence. I feel with students where culturally they feel that a white female, that you've got to act in this or that way, physically is more pertinent than online. But that's only my observation. The students don't experience it like that. So I think there are definitely differences in how we engage, but there's also familiarity to some extent, the accessibility of the lecture online, that we don't get in a physical space. So what I've learned from this whole exercise was that what we had physically face-to-face has now been almost exploded, expanded, and enriched, because we have different places with different roles and practices play out that enrich the end result.
Continuing with your metaphor around stirring and then blending.
Yes.
With blended learning, I think it's always the question, what are you blending? Are you blending different tools? Are you blending, sometimes people think it's about the technology, and you're blending the real world and the virtual world. But you're mentioning here, you're also blending the power relationships. That relationship between the lecturer and the students. So I think that is that a useful way that people can think about what they're blending in their contexts?
I think for me, the blend also means that we are blurring or crossing thresholds. On campus, we implying that learning happens on campus, and then they go away and perhaps they go do some preparation. But there are overlaps between these spaces. So we are also blending how one kind of engagement moves into another, and that reinforces. So the online engagement reinforces the physical. You can refer to things that happened in the office online. So it's kind of woven in a way that's not a kitchen analogy, but it's stirring in the sense of disrupting and then blending, but it becomes a mix. So it's not just a compilation of a whole lot of things. It's like design. It's not picking on tools and putting them together, like they're still separate. Together they become something totally different by the way that they are working together. So you're creating something new, rather than having a podcast, having this, having Facebook, having that. The webinar becomes a particular kind of thing because of all the other things that's blended with it.
And also your sort of architectural background means that you've got a particular perspective on design that you bring to learning design and how you design blended learning. Do you see that as being different to what you're seeing in the literature or how other people are doing things?
Yeah. I think it's work in progress. I think that is the big thing, because it's quite intimidating to say, okay, now I have to design this program or course. How do we, I would rather say start with the known and then slowly test and implement small interventions and learn from it. If it's an organic process, it's it's got much more chance to succeed in the end. It's not this big change that now everybody's on this bandwagon, we've got to do this or that or the other. It may not be appropriate for your particular learning context.
I'm coming from chemical engineering, and I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, okay, how can we do it to ChemEng? We've got practicals, we've got tutorials and everything. And then I was also wondering, coming from this is the first one in South Africa, this blended learning course. Is there any other happening overseas that you could actually ask for help when you start doing this? If we want to do something like that, how do I go and ask for help?
I did do a presentation at the Society of Engineering Educators in Port Elizabeth, I think last year. That was interesting because I'm quite excited about the way that other disciplines, medicine, nursing, physiotherapy, in fact, yes, like I said earlier on, I don't think there's a program that's not project-based really, where you want ultimately graduates to be able to work in the field, in industry. To get back to your example, I mean, we looked for examples across the world. The Boston Architectural College in America has got a similar but different. They don't do webinars. They often, the blend is not it's putting resources up on the internet. For me, that a digital ebook is just like a paper, it's not interactive. I'm curious about how can the online environment mediate engagement. To respond to your question about where do you draw on, I would say the Emerge community is a very good place to go bounce ideas off. And then I'm always very excited to talk to people, and because through your questions, I also learn. Yes.
So silk hat on for a minute.
Yes.
There are a number of courses at UCT that have been running either as blended or online for an extended period of time. And one of the services, consultants, communities that we will support departments or courses through that transition process, through the translation process. So there'll be a team of people who will work with you on that process. I think what's also really interesting for me is that in a weird way, I think the blending process works particularly well with professional spaces rather than with, say, a more generic Bachelor of Arts, Bachelor of Science. I think one might consider with engineering looking at a kind of variation in the shape of the blending over a 4-year period or for the traditional 4 or 5 year period. So maybe your first years are with you a great deal on campus, but as they move through 2nd, 3rd, 4th year, they spend more and more time off campus and more time at industrial sites. And I think particularly, certainly in the health sciences, people are using blended programs a great deal for postgraduate work. So people are already out there in industry, committed to particular institutions who engage in postgraduate study through online forums rather than having to give up work and come back to university, which is hard for professional engineers to wrap their heads around. It's quite a knock to suddenly give up my professional life for 2 years and come back and do a master's or 5 years for a PhD.
I think the off-campus is quite the extreme of the blend, but there are ways in which you can use technology in the classroom. For example, digital stories. We've used digital stories at the foundation level to give students a voice, to engage them through their indigenous knowledge, to help them construct, rather than just consume information. So, in fact, we started in 2010 with our design resulted from a problem that we had. We had a problem that the building industry was slumping, and our students who go out in their 2nd year for their practice year couldn't find work in Cape Town. So they had to go elsewhere. We said, all right, instead of meeting you every Friday, let's meet you in blocks. And that's where it started. We didn't do that with the aim of designing a blended program. So I think it's to see what little things can you do and slowly build towards how do the students respond to it and what will work in the end. Are we doing for time? Are we?
A bit
running
over,
over.
but people are very engaged, which is always very exciting.
Yes.
Yeah, over to you, Jakob.
Yes, we are approaching, just getting a bit of echo here. We're approaching the end of this session. First of all, thank you so much, Jolanda, for being able and willing to give us this very exciting view on blended learning. And also to thank you to those of you who are with us here in the venue and those of you online. This session is, like I said in the beginning, being recorded and it will be shared. We will be sharing it on our Emerge Africa website. I'm just going to put the URL in the chat there. And also on our Facebook group that you are all very welcome to join. As a shortcut, then you can go to Merge Africa and then /Facebook, and then you will be directed to our Facebook group, and then we'll put the recording there. So thank you, everybody. I'm realizing the only disadvantage I can think of about Blend right now is that it's only some of you that I can invite to join us for some biscuits or some coffee that we have placed just outside this venue. All right, so I'm going to end the recording now, and then see you all either online or in the physical space.
Thanks, Jakob. Thank you very much.
The recording is off.
Good. I'm very happy to continue if there are questions in the on Facebook group or wherever, whatever platform.
Oh, can we say conversation continued?